Sorry. We then took a ferry across and landed in Scotland. Just kind of, they use every square inch of space. This is right up against the ocean where they're grazing, kind of grazing and feeding sheep. We visited another dairy in Scotland. Scottish dairy was a little bit closer to that in the U.S. The grazing season was only about 6 months of the year, so they spent a lot more time indoors. They spent a lot more time in confinement and getting higher energy feeds. These are some pictures of the calves. All through the EU, every animal, they call it a passport, pretty much keeps track of where it was born, when it was born, where it's been. Traceability is 100%. It's one of the things they take pride in. It's how they also market their milk and beef and all their dairy products, is that they have complete traceability. There's an example of the ear tag there. They're usually tattooed and also have RFID codes on them. Note the little necklaces the calves are wearing. They go in, no one has to do bottle chores like everyone has to as kids. The computer reads it, and as the calf goes in the machine, it sends a certain amount of milk through, and then when it's done, it kicks it out. So here's a picture of a nice slurry bed. Typical looking, it really looks just like a harvest store with the top taken off. They store this year round and will spread it, I think during a 4 or 6 week period. Shortly after we left, usually in January and February is when they're allowed to spread their slurry. Predominantly goes on the pasture. This is a shot of the bunk space, or inside the dairy. Note that it's grass silage, not corn silage like you would see at the dairy here. Still smells for the most part the same, just kind of with a little difference in the bunk than what we would see. And typical, just silage pile, just like you would, or silage pit like you would have anywhere else. That's a typical road off to the right. Everywhere we went, it was usually asphalt or concrete. You know, with the amount of rain and cool, damp conditions, our bus would have gotten stuck, I'm sure, countless times. We did have pretty good bus drivers. I was amazed at how often they could navigate not only in the city but in the countryside without cutting too many people off. I don't think we ever got lost. They did a fantastic job. I don't know how they found some of these places.
So once after we visited dairy, we ended up in Edinburgh, Scotland. Personally, one of my favorite cities that we got the chance to visit. One of the things you can grasp from this picture is the gallery in the front you can see is more of a cleaner stone color. The buildings, older buildings in the back are much more studi looking. That's because over hundreds of years, the soot from the coal and the smoke and the peat that they burn has like absorbed into the stone, and that's part of the problem with the stone they use there is it's very porous. But the problem now they're having is they've started to clean and restore some of these buildings, and now they have taken off this protective layering, and it's actually allowing a mold to grow in there and turn green. And so it's kind of a big deal right now to decide if they leave it the black sooty color or if they try to find some new protective coating to put on there to preserve those buildings. Here's a picture of the street on the left-hand side. It's the Royal Mile, which connects the Edinburgh Castle and then the Holyrood House, which is the Queen's house on the other end. You can see it's even the city streets, are narrow, not just the country roads. We walked up and down that mile, lots of touristy shops and little places, nooks that you can get off and see. The picture on the right is just for you to kind of appreciate the blackness, I guess, of the buildings and the architecture. On top, we haven't had too many pictures of food yet, but this was a meal we had in Edinburgh. It was lamb, potatoes, of course, vegetables, and a pear. But we had a lot of meat potatoes and mushy vegetables while we were in Ireland and Scotland and England. But it was very similar. I can see our heritage, like where a lot of it comes from, because it was very similar to what we eat at home. The picture on the bottom right is just of some architecture. It was a building that they've reused now, but it's the dome, and that's actual painting. It's just gorgeous. There's architecture everywhere. And then me on top of the Edinburgh Castle. Here's the group in front of the castle. We toured it. There's a picture later on if you can appreciate. It's up really high. Supposedly it's never been overtaken, right, is what they claim, is their claim to fame. But our guide, told us he feels that if you would have asked people today to make that kind of castle in that location, they'd tell you it couldn't be done. So it's pretty amazing what they've been able to accomplish then. This is one of I think the church that was at the castle from the other side. There you can see how high it was. And when we first started walking, we all said, we're walking up there? And then we were able to take a nice leisurely pace and get a lot of touring up there, but it was just magnificent. And here's at the other end of the mile is the Holyrood House, where the Queen stays into there, the Scottish Parliament, I guess. And finally, the Scottish Parliament, which this is a very controversial building for Edinburgh. As you can tell, it's very different style of buildings from the rest of the city. It's new, it's their new Parliament. It leaves quite a bit of interpretation for the people there, from the person who was the architect who designed the building. One of the big issues right now in Scotland is the idea of Scottish independence from the rest of Britain and from the rest of the UK. And a lot of the people we talked to seemed to be that they wouldn't be opposed to Scottish independence, but they were afraid that they would be able to sustain themselves from England. The people we talked to in England seem to say if they want to go, let them go, and it will be okay. So they think, the people that think they can make it, that they have enough natural resources to help, that they would sell and they would be able to support themselves. Part of the problem is they don't feel that they are accurately represented in England, in Parliament, that they don't have the same amount of people in Parliament to represent. It's very different. Agriculture, the land's very different, so some of the regulations that are implemented don't really fit Scotland as well. So also while we were going around, if any of you are Harry Potter fans, J.K. Rowling, this is where she wrote Harry Potter, and much of her ideas for Harry Potter came from writing in there.
After this, we went to the Bauman farm. Here's us having another pretty heavy meal. I'm not a real big guy, but I came back weighing 4 pounds heavier than when I took off, so we ate pretty well. This is a shot of one of the fields. As you went further south, there was more cereal grains, and it was not uncommon. Obviously, when there's livestock in the field, you have to drive out anyway, but it was not uncommon. On one day, we actually saw a guy actually out plowing still, and it looked incredibly wet. So seeing fields like this, I don't know how the compaction didn't absolutely decimate the fields, but it was not uncommon to see ground worked even in the middle of winter. Bales, everything had to be covered. It was either inside or it was wrapped. Just everything was, it always has to be succumb to the wet, moist conditions, and so feedstuffs like this need to be protected. Here's a Klaus combine, not too different once we got into grain. Once we started to get into cereal country, a lot of these farms didn't look that much different than what you would see here. This is just another shot. We were, you can see another more hot wires, rotational grazing. Off to the north, it was still pretty cold where we were at. Edinburgh is at the same latitude as Moscow, so there's still snow off in the distance. We then went through Stirling, where we also had our homestays. We stayed again in Scotland. We divided probably, or in Stirling, excuse me,
Yeah.
5, 6 different groups of people. We split up and stayed with 5 or 6 different families. Just a fascinating group to stay with. Most of these families, they just took people in throughout the year, almost similar to a bed and breakfast, but a homestay and a bed and breakfast, as we learned, are 2 very, very different things. Some groups were pretty active, others pretty much they sat them down and said, here's your supper, and they went and watched the telly and were to let them do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to roam and find out what was going on in town, they were free to do so. Otherwise, most of us enjoyed being with our host couples. We spent 2 nights mostly just chatting with them and just getting their perspective. We were amazed at how much the Scottish people, at least in the homes I was in, knew about the U.S. They knew who Governor Romney was. They knew who Newt Gingrich was. They knew, and I couldn't tell you who they were running against in their elections right now, but it was fascinating. Entertainment, television, movies, all of that they knew very, very well. Where we had they had a lot of DVDs, and they were almost entirely American movies. So it was very interesting, kind of a neat perspective to understand just how much they knew about us, but we honestly didn't know quite as much about them. After that, we toured the Glenturret distillery and got to see, to be fair, how the Scotch made their whiskey versus the Irish. Again, they really pushed for the Scottish style, which is they burn peat and make a very smoky whiskey. Never really agreed with me. After that, we toured into, we dropped down into England. We stopped and visited Oxford. I did not know that Oxford is actually a consortium of about 24 undergraduate colleges and I think 12 or 11 or 12 graduate colleges. I just assumed it was one university. It's actually a consortium of several. Students there you wouldn't pick a university like we do here and say, well, I want to go to the University of Nebraska. You might say, well, I want to study economics and I want to study it under Professor so-and-so. And so you would then go to whatever college that professor taught at, and that's kind of how you determine. So, and it varied wildly, just depending on whatever you wanted to study. Oxford, obviously it's been around hundreds of years. It started out with teaching Latin. And so, but of course, there's still cathedrals and churches in about every single college.
And so after we were in Oxford, then we made our trip down into London. And we started up in Edinburgh and we drove to London. It was quite a long way, so we had a lot of time to see the scenery on the way down. Here, this is the Westminster Abbey, which is one of the most famous chapels in London. And this is the Tower of London, which has been used for many things. People actually live in there now, but it's the old prison for London. And of course, the Big Ben, which is the Parliament there. And you can see, I guess, the next picture, some Occupy protesters, which we saw those actually in quite a few of the larger cities that we were at. This was the closest we got to them, so they're everywhere. And the London Bridge, everyone has heard of the London Bridge over the River Thames. And that's just a picture of their Parliament, the Parliament building there. And the London Eye. One of the things that was really important about London while we were there, we learned there's actually more U.S. banks represented in London than in New York. It's a huge center of commerce and trade. One of the main reasons why all those banks are centrally located there. It's close to all markets, centrally located in the time zone. And also we spent time at the U.S. Embassy there, which was the largest U.S. embassy. And also important because of the allies that we are with them and how important that relationship is between Great Britain and the United States. Here is part of the Royal Army that was going into Buckingham Palace. It was pretty neat to see them march down the street. They clear the way for everybody. And Buckingham Palace, which is pretty neat. One of the interesting facts we learned was there's a flag that flies, and depending on if they're there or not, depends on if the flag is flying. And the guards, there's the British Army, there's different plumes, so depending on what color plume you see depends on if it's the Irish, the Welsh, the Scottish, or the English Army.
After that, we traveled to Cambridge. This is one of the larger grain farms in England. That's actually a farmhouse. What you see there is built in 1550. It's actually been converted and restored. There's a large garden off to the side that we're walking along some of the pools. It's a gorgeous farm. And on it, Monsanto had one of their, I guess you could say, one of their labs, one of their testing facilities on this farm. Mostly they worked for canola there, and they were doing a lot of testing on oil content, not all that much different than you see in a Monsanto lab. Just to show some of the equipment, this farm was over 3,000 acres, so it was one of the largest in England. A lot of the equipment was very large. They had 298, 80, I think, combines. No-till over there means just not plowing. It still means you're chiseling, but no-till is something very, very different than what we see here. It's the most important thing they're looking to do is get the soil dried out. Here's some grain storage, flat storage. Right behind it, I didn't get a picture of, is a very large grain dryer. Probably no huge surprise that with all that moisture, the grain's pretty wet when they get it harvested. If you can barely see, this is either wheat or barley. But in all the fields, you'll see the tracks going through it. They call them tram lines. Obviously, it gets sprayed quite frequently with fungicide due to the wet, moist conditions. So they just go on the same paths as they seed it, as they harvest it, as they spray it. They also have a few livestock on this facility. Again, everything's inside during January. Some fossil Herefords here, well bedded down. And in case you're wondering where the Union Jack comes from, it is a combination of the English and Scottish flag.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Nebraska Agribusiness Club, INR, and UNL for their continued support of the Nebraska Lead Program and helping us continue these opportunities for future Lead Fellows. here's some more information if you would like to see more pictures and blogs that we had about our lease and where you can access that. See that. How about you?